Welcome to today's video. We are going to go over my least favorite books of so far this year in 2023. Just before we get started, I do want to make a small disclosure. Unfortunately, you have to do that, but just because I didn't enjoy these books, one, doesn't mean that they're bad. They're just my least favorite, or that you shouldn't read them. This is all my opinion, and some of these I think are good books. I can see how many people like them. They're just not books for me, and that's fine. Going over the categories before we dive into the overall, but my least favorite in the fantasy category was Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. I do think T.J. Klune is a very character-driven writer, so if you don't connect with the characters, you're definitely, I feel like, going to miss a little bit of the enjoyment of the book. Oh, I think this is a good book. I can see how many people liked it, but for some reason, I just felt like there was more to the story that I wanted. I don't know what that is, and I was a little let down by it. So that would be my least favorite fantasy that I've read so far. My least favorite historical fiction would be Trust by Hernan Diaz. I do think that this has an intriguing story and storyline. However, I didn't like that it kind of doesn't give you an answer at the end, which I know is kind of part of the story. But I also just didn't understand why we were so invested necessarily in these characters' stories, because it was just a story about their lives and maybe which parts of them are true. But overall, it's a fine book. I was a little let down for what I was expecting. My least favorites in the horror category would be Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. I was having such high expectations for this. What this book was in the end was what I wanted the entire thing to be. A little bit of this supernatural vibe and questions, the house coming to life. I just didn't feel like you got enough of that throughout the story, and then the end felt a little disjointed from everything else. Unfortunately, it just didn't seem like a very cohesive story to me, and I was let down. Mystery thriller, I did declutter this book, Black Girl, White Girl by Patricia Moyes. I just felt like this was a very surface level book. It was in the middle of the series, so maybe some of those stories and character development that was crucial to the story would have been there, but again, it felt very surface level. It didn't get deep. It felt it's definitely a book that had it not been so short, I would have DNF'd, but overall, I don't get it. Not a book for me. My least favorite romance is Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey. Maybe if I read this at the right season of window shopping time, Christmas, I would have did it. But I did not feel the characters' connection. The characters just kind of annoyed me. I don't know. This book it doesn't work for me. I don't know what it is, but I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the chemistry. I didn't like the premise. Any of it. It's not a book that works for me. There are other Tessa Bailey books that I like, so it's not necessarily a Tessa Bailey specific thing. It is definitely a window shopping thing. My least favorite sci-fi is To Sleep in the Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. It's just very long. The world development is definitely intense and intricate. I think that his world building in this was done fantastically, and I can understand how people, especially in the sci-fi world, are really going to love this book. So I definitely think that this has a very large, broad audience. That audience just wasn't me. My least favorite young adult was Witch World by Christopher Pike. I'm just going to go ahead and leave my reviews of this. I did do a blind date vlog, but again, just some of this is a reread, and the first time I read it, there were some things that kind of annoyed me, were kind of triggers for me, but then upon reread, they were just glaring, and I couldn't do it. Definitely a book I'm getting rid of. I have no desire to read. I can't say that at the time of this being a young adult, about that age, would have been topics that I was relating to, or any of that stuff. So I love the idea of there being a witch world and a human world, or a normal world, whatever you want to call it. I love that aspect. I just did not at all enjoy some of the other aspects. So definitely let down. Originally was a 4-star the first time I read it and fell to a 2, and it was a gut to get through. To go over my top 5 overall, I do have to unfortunately include some of my DNFs. One of those being Turbination Shock by Neil Stephenson. I do think that there's, again, a good audience for people who are like this. If you kind of like that into the world dystopia sci-fi vibe, that's not me. So that's why it's on my list. Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. Maybe this has just built up too much in my life, but I got about 50% of the way through it before I DNF'd it, and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't understand what I'm supposed to care about these characters. Alas, that is why this is on the list. Say overall, When to Shop by Tessa Bailey was one of my least favorite books this year. Just on an overall, not just in romance category. Again, Black Girl, White Girl, just like the level of disappointment and just like, yeah, just I didn't enjoy that one. Definitely, that's why I have already gotten rid of it, but that would definitely be on my top 5 overall. And then The Tall, Tall Grass by Stephen King and Joe Hill. I will say I understand how this book could be perceived as good. Do go look at trigger warnings. The reason that this was a hard book for me is there were things in that story that are things I don't want to read about, and I definitely don't want to read about in that depth. As in-depth as that story goes into, but it's definitely a fast-paced, in-your-face, gory book, Stephen King. Like, it delivers on all levels. It's just not what I want to read about. And so that's why it's on my least favorite, but objectively I could understand how it could be a good book. That will wrap it up for our least favorite books of the year, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.